Hello and welcome to Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannon. Today I'm going to review chapter 13 of my newest book, God in Our Superdeterministic Universe, the number one argument for the existence of God. My book is available on Amazon Kindle. Chapter 13 is entitled Solution to the Free Will Paradox. Today, I'm going to show you how to use Dr. Hanson's version of superdeterminism to solve a paradox that has troubled philosophers for thousands of years. Now, I've written out a version of the paradox, and I will read it for you. So, number one, God knows choice C that a human would claim to make freely. Number two, it is now necessary that C. Number three, if it is now necessary that C, then C cannot be otherwise. This is the definition of necessary. That is, there are no actual possibilities due to predestination. Number four, if you cannot do otherwise when you act, you do not act freely. Number five, therefore, when you do an act, you will not do it freely. So the free will paradox is showing that there is a fundamental incompatibility between an omniscient God and your free will. An omniscient God would have to know everything, including everything you would ever choose to do. So he would know this before you ever did it, which means when you go to make the choice, you have to go the way he already knows you're going to, which means you have no real choice in the matter, which means you can't have free will. So how do you get out of this? The answer is this. Under Dr. Hanson's version of superdeterminism, we live in a static block reality without temporal causation. Everything is predetermined, which means every decision you make on Earth is a predetermined choice. It is not a choice you perform through free will. There is no free will on Earth. You have to do what you have been predetermined to do on Earth. So there's no problem with God having omniscience of what you do on Earth, because what you do on Earth is predetermined and it doesn't have free will in it. So that's not a problem. So the problem is, well, where do we get free will from? And the answer is cinematism. And I did a whole video on this in chapter 12. So what is cinematism? Cinematism says that God predetermines the universe to exhibit what he already knows your freely willed choices would be. So how is it that God can know your freely willed choices? And that's because of God's unique nature. God is divinely simple without parts. That means in God, there's no parts in which you can create a causal chain between God's choice and God's knowledge of your choices. And because of that, God's knowledge of your freely willed choices are truly your freely willed choices. So when God exhibits what he knows your freely willed choices are in the universe, he's exhibiting what he already knows your freely willed choices really would be. So even though the universe is predetermined, the universe is really just an exhibition of your freely willed choices. So you still own those choices because God knows what your freely willed choices are, and they're not God's choices because there's no causal chains to connect your freely willed choices to God's choices. So that's how you get out of the paradox. So an omniscient God can exist with freely willed choices through cinematism and superdeterminism and a predetermined universe. Some also like to attack God by saying that God must have foreknowledge of his own decisions uh, because he's omniscient. In other words, God has to already know how God is going to decide things. But this is fundamentally mistaken because God is a timeless being. He's not subject to time. And the idea of foreknowledge is the idea of having knowledge before you would otherwise acquire it. But it assumes that you acquire information sequentially in time. God is a timeless being. He doesn't acquire information sequentially in time. God always knows everything there is to know. He doesn't acquire new knowledge. So uh, the the fundamental problem is claiming that God has foreknowledge. God does not have foreknowledge. That's for a temporal being foreknowledge, but not for God. God is timeless. Um, because God must know and understand what he predetermines to create in the universe, then God must fully understand human beings. Because God fully understands human beings, then God can certainly understand how to communicate um, his will to humans. Indeed, God used a human, that is Jesus, to communicate his will to humanity. Um, so God can understand humanity because he has to predetermine humanity into the universe. So he understands how to communicate with humans, and the way he decided to communicate it was with another human being, namely Jesus. You know, duh. That seems like a great way to do it. God can also predetermine that you have spiritual experiences in your life that also communicate his will in a personal relationship with God. Some might say that if you prayed for a specific outcome which God could give you, that outcome might mean compromising someone else's free will, uh, showing us that we are God's puppets after all. So, for example, let's say you prayed to God that you get an A on your test, even though you deserved a C. If God were to make it so that the teacher gave you an A, then God would be suppressing that teacher's free will because that teacher would choose to give you a C. So, isn't that an example of God interfering with our free will? And the answer is no. Under superdeterminism, because God has omnipresence or knowledge of all our freely will decisions in all circumstances, in all universes, God can look for those circumstances where the teacher would freely choose to give you an A, despite the fact that you deserved a C. And he can predetermine that teacher's choice into our universe without usurping her free will. So there is a solution to this. God can grant that prayer if it's an acceptable prayer to God, and if it's possible. It may be that uh, through his omnipresence, he sees no circumstances under which this teacher would freely will to give you an A despite deserving a C, in which case it couldn't be done. But because God predetermines the universe, he can predetermine the universe he wants to predetermine based on what he knows everybody's freely will decisions would be under omnipresence. So he can predetermine a universe, perhaps to grant a prayer that somebody get an A on a test when they really deserved a C, while still preserving the free will of the teacher. Some say that free will on earth is necessary to explain the evil choices people make. Otherwise, God has no excuse for allowing evil on earth. But there is no free will on earth because the universe is predetermined without temporal causation under superdeterminism. So the problem of evil is not solved um, by through free will. So how is the problem of evil solved? I got an answer for that too. Evil and suffering is all connected to life. So if there were no human beings or living creatures on earth, there would be no evil or suffering. So the first thing to understand is that life itself causes suffering. Another thing to understand is that the origins of life are due to Darwinian evolution. Therefore, it's absolutely true to say that Darwinian evolution causes suffering. Now, Darwinian evolution is necessary for the creation of life. The only method we know of for creating life from the ground up, from natural processes, is Darwinian evolution. Therefore, Darwinian evolution is necessary for the creation of life. Therefore, God must allow Darwinian evolution and hence suffering to exist because it is a necessary evil in order that life exist. Uh, if you think about is evolution necessary for life to exist? Think about a predetermined universe consisting of a manifold of abutting hyperplanes of space-time, and there's small changes in the appearance sequentially from these abutting hyperplanes of space-time. So what is it that you're supposed to do in that manifold in order for life to arise? And the universe is generally strictly deterministic. So you can see that you need a process by which you can gradually generate life over abutting hyperplanes. And that process is Darwinian evolution. So that's the way life is created. And that's the only way God can do it. And Darwinian evolution has evil aspects to it. There's no doubt about it. Darwinian evolution has survival of the fittest. Um, it's in an environment which is competitive and dangerous, and those that mix is what allows evolution to occur. So evil and suffering is inseparable from evolution, and consequently, God has to allow it in order for life to exist. Pain and suffering is an aspect and sometimes an advantage in natural selection and survival of the fittest in an ever changing and sometimes dangerous environment. Don't blame God for evil, blame Darwinian evolution. Um, some may say that because free will must exist in heaven, then evil must exist in heaven as well, which is impossible. But uh, heaven would also be a predetermined special universe. And so God can pick and choose what freely willed decisions of yours, if you're going to heaven, he's going to exhibit in heaven. And so his choices can be selective so that he never chooses to exhibit anything that you do evil in heaven. So, because our universe is predetermined and it's a static block reality without temporal causation, then one can assume that a special universe like heaven would also operate on those same fundamental principles of predetermination and in a static block reality without temporal causation. So God can pick and choose from his omnipresence what he knows you would freely choose to do. So he can predetermine a heaven that exhibits only your freely willed choices, which are good and not evil. So evil does not have to appear in heaven at all under superdeterminism. Um, so, yeah, I hope you learned something. Uh, the ability of Dr. Hanson's version of superdeterminism to solve very long-standing dilemmas and problems in philosophy and religion is very impressive. Uh, so read my book, and I'll see you next time when I uh, give a review of chapter 14, which is entitled The End of Pantheism. All right, take care, everybody.